in your testimony at the May 23rd hearing, Mr. Gill for the Planning Commission had asked you to stipulate to certain conditions, and your answer was for comments 5 to 15, which are those that are directly related to your work, that you made reference that you were on the record with specific information and that you believed that the rest were agreeable. You were, in regards, talking about whether you agree, were you in agreement with the comments 5 through 15. And it just seemed kind of vague, and I was just wondering if there was a way that you could clearly articulate what you meant there.
I believe during that testimony, I was asked to comment on a group to give testimony on a group of comments, and we then went through each of the comments in more detail. But I would have to go back and reference that exhibit to be able to go through that again and specify on each comment, what is acceptable in terms of our analysis.
Sure, I mean, your answer was the ones that I indicate were agreeable, yes. The others would be open to continued coordination. What did you mean by open to continued coordination?
So one of the comments, some of the language in comment number 6, I testified to earlier this evening. It speaks to the fact that the connector road the location of the connector road should be immediately west of Westminster Presbyterian Church and align with the proposed access to the Orvis commercial tract. As I testified to earlier this evening, the Orvis tract, or Arborview as it's also called, their access is proposed opposite property that the applicant doesn't own, so that, for example, is something that they cannot physically provide. So that would be an example.
But I guess what I was trying to get at is, what did you mean by open to continued coordination? So you were saying ones that were agreeable, yes, but then the ones that were at disagreement that would be open to continued coordination.
Well, many of these comments refer to items that are under the jurisdiction of PennDOT. So, the applicant will be under the jurisdiction of PennDOT for anything along state roadways. So they would not be able to commit to something that PennDOT would not permit or potentially, approve or not approve. So that would also be an example of continued coordination would be needed. They can't necessarily accept something that they don't know if PennDOT will accept.
So for ones that weren't under PennDOT's purview, what do you mean by continued coordination?
In comment 12, for example, it speaks to coordination and approval by the township for a landscaping plan, for example. So even within the comments themselves, it speaks to further coordination would be needed for some of these items. I mean, we can go through it line by line if you want to. I'm happy to do so.
No, that's fine. I was trying to understand what you were referencing.
Those are the items that I was referring to. So in a broad sense, there are items within this set of comments that refer to ongoing coordination. There are items that I think contradict some of the items that PennDOT has indicated they want to see. There are certainly some that contradict, other comments that we've heard throughout this conditional use hearing. So those are the items that I'm referring to, ongoing coordination, and the applicant is open to, the 202 access being an example, that there are some contradictory opinions, and so that further coordination is needed to determine, what the township wants to move forward with.
Okay, just one final question. Regarding the historic structure at the corner of 926 and 202, you had testified that PennDOT currently has a tip for improvements at that intersection, and that by the potential widening of that road should not have an impact on that, and you had thought that it wouldn't come as close as 12 or 14 feet. I can't remember what you had said, but you said that you would need to go back and verify that. I was just wondering if, since the last time you were before this board, you've had a chance to confirm the distance and the need or not need of potentially moving that structure.
That's really within the purview of PennDOT's project, and they have not released any further detailed design on that. So it would really require PennDOT to weigh in on that for their design.
What is a typically safe distance for a building to be next to a state road?
There really isn't a standard for that. I mean, certainly you have clear zones that you like to see along roadways based on their classification, but there really isn't a standard distance in terms of what is safe or not safe.
Is there any difference between new construction, existing construction, or historic structures?
There are certainly land development requirements that would talk about, building setbacks, etc. But for a historic structure, it's certainly not uncommon that things change around it, and things, don't necessarily meet a new land development standard. I would say in general, as a general comment.
When the PennDOT tip or the construction phase completes, or whatever terminology you want to use, and if the historic structure needs to be moved for that, is that something the applicant would be willing to do?
I can't speak to the historic structure. That's not a part of my expertise, nor was I asked to look at that as part of this evaluation. So that would be up to the applicant.
So then I guess just a more general question. In your experience as a traffic consultant, if additional traffic improvements are needed due to your study, if historic structures were required to be moved, would that be something that applicants typically would agree to?
If it's a part of the requirement for the development and the associated required improvements that a historic structure be moved, then certainly that is something that has occurred on projects.
Okay, I'm sorry, just one additional follow-up question, I apologize. When you did the traffic study, did you do it with the 202-926 intersection as it is today, or as it will be once the construction is complete at that intersection?
We did it as both.
And what was the difference between the two?
In general terms, approximately, the PennDOT project, I believe, resulted in about a 20% decrease in delay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have some more questions. West Pleasant Grove is this wonderful scenic drive and historic. Are you familiar with any of our regulations regarding that particular road or the protection of our viewsheds of our roads?
I'm familiar with the roadway standards within the township ordinance.
Road standards are very different than I'm asking, and I'll ask the same question again. Are you familiar with any of our scenic or historic road pieces, ordinances that relate to historic or roads of viewsheds with this significance?
I'm not familiar with those types of ordinances as it relates to roadways, no.
Okay, and in respect to your road plan, inside your plan, in the development, not the outside road systems, Given PHMC's eligibility status for this particular property to be a historic structure in its entirety, is your road system impacting any historic element on that property?
That would be a question for the historic consultant. That was not a part of my review or evaluation as part of this development.
Are any of your designed roadway system impacting any historic properties?
The road
Is it
system was
on top of any historic element?
The road system was designed by the site engineer, and the historic consultant would have reviewed the historic resources on the property, so it's just not a part of my review or my expertise to comment on that.
Okay. And in respect to the Presbyterian Church, Westminster Presbyterian Church, sorry. How are those people exiting in your new plan? How are they going northbound?
Their access would not change from what it is today. To travel northbound today, they would have to, I would assume their primary option would be to travel West Pleasant Road to New Street to 926 to 202 northbound.
Okay. And Bridlewood, have you done any studies on the safety and the traffic impact on that very vulnerable neighborhood immediately south, and the impact of the large numbers of volume that will be rerouted through there as a result? Have you accommodated any elements to mitigate that?
We have met with Thornbury Township, and they have hired a special traffic consultant to look at the Briarwood Boulevard roadway and coordinate with the neighbors to determine potential traffic calming master plan for that neighborhood. And the applicant is will continue coordination with Thornbury Township on those elements.
Have you considered any of the pedestrian elements of the children in your new development that will walk to school?
The proposed development will include pedestrian connections throughout. In regards to walking to school, I do not believe that this development is in close proximity. We did not, I will say, we did not complete an evaluation of, trips to school, walking trips to school as part of our traffic impact study evaluation.
Crosswalks either, correct?
Crosswalks out.
You haven't mentioned or evaluated any crosswalks either across 202, across 926, or across West Pleasant Grove Road to get up to 2 schools, which are immediately north.
Is that a question?
Yeah, it is. Did you do any evaluation of pedestrian access and crossings with your existing plan that we have received?
We have not completed a pedestrian connection and crosswalk evaluation from the development to the neighboring schools.
Okay, you also mentioned in your testimony that you would possibly be widening roads, etc. Are you familiar on South New Street that you have a historic property immediately on the west side, which is on the Chester County Historic Cultural Survey sites surveyed and is
Yes.
Brenton Quarry and Historic Barrens.
Yes, we are familiar with that property and its status on the register.
So if you needed to widen the road, would you do that on the eastern side?
We have taken a very, very preliminary look at that, and yes, if widening is needed in that area, we would certainly have to avoid impacts to that historic property and would not be able to acquire right of way there. So yes, widening would have to occur on the opposite side.
And have you looked at the impact to that very small bridge and very dangerous turn on South New Street, and the integrity and structural integrity of that bridge and the cost that you may incur or need to invest in given the increase in traffic and the increase of type of traffic?
At this time, we have not identified an impact to that structure, and we have not completed any detailed analysis of its condition.
I think that's it. For now.
Sorry, I just have one additional question. So, in regards to the intersection of 926 at Bridlewood, you had testified that all site access design construction will be the responsibility of the applicant, and it is proposed that a new traffic signal would be installed there. Does that also include any future escrow payments for upgrades to that traffic light, or timing or backup generators for that signal?
That would be determined during the design phase in terms of provision of generator backup, battery backup, those types of elements. And we certainly aren't at a point where we've discussed any maintenance agreements, which are certainly common with development accesses. We have not discussed any of that at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the board? If not, I have a couple from Ms. Kline. First of all, Ms. Kline, thank you for coming back in July. I appreciate that. I'd like to turn your attention. I have a couple questions on Exhibit A36, if you can get that in front of you. That was the December 2nd, 2016 minutes of the scoping meeting that you prepared.
Yes, I have A36.
Okay, thank you. I want to follow up on a question from Mr. Hawes, which was related to access out along New Street. Do you see at the bottom of the first page, there's a provision that provides that Andrew, and correct me if I'm wrong, does that refer to Andrew Seaman?
Yes.
Indicated that consideration was given to provide access along New Street. However, Toll believes the PHMC, which is the Pennsylvania Historic Museum Commission, and possibly the county, did not want access due to historical significance and view shed that exist along New Street with mature trees. Did I read that right?
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware if PHMC or the county has expressed anything in writing about a preference not to have any access out to New Street?
I cannot speak to that.
Okay. Were you aware of the basis of that statement during the meeting?
No.
Okay. Can we turn to page 2? In the top paragraph, I'd like to talk about, which is dealing with what the letter refers to as the connector road. And it talks about Fran. Is that Fran Haney from PennDOT?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. He was asking about the connector road through the site and says, according to your memo, quote, will strongly recommend, PennDOT will strongly recommend that the connector road be provided. In response, Mr. Seaman indicated that the connector road may be feasible with the bonus density, but it would be undesirable to have a high-volume roadway through the residential development since homes could not be constructed along it. Do you take that, or did PennDOT take that, or are we to take that to mean that Toll is not willing to construct the connector road without a bonus density aspect?
I cannot speak to what the applicant is willing or not willing to do in those terms.
Okay, what was your understanding of the meaning of that statement at the time of the meeting? You were present when Mr. Seaman said that to Mr. Haynes, I believe. Or do you not know?
I don't know, but I believe the intent of this statement, as I understood it at the meeting, was to get to the point that it's undesirable to have a high-volume connection through this type of development.
And I think the township would agree with you that we don't want a high-volume road. But I don't believe, you correct me if I'm wrong, was Mr. Haney asking the status about a high-volume local, well, let's put it this way, is a local collector road a high-volume road, I guess, in your opinion?
A local connector road? No, I do not believe that's a high-volume road.
So if a local collector road is constructed, then that would probably address the high-volume aspect of the concern expressed by Mr. Seaman at that meeting. Is that right?
Objection. You'd have to ask Mr. Seaman.
Well, I just asked her if she knows.
The applicant would have to speak to that.
Do you have any idea if Mr. Seaman intends to testify?
I can't speak to what witnesses will be called.
That's fair. Down on the fourth paragraph, there's a comment that starts with Drew asked. Who is Drew, if you don't mind identifying that?
The first page has the list of attendees in detail. Drew Sirianni works for Pannoni as the consultant reviewer for PennDOT.
Okay, thank you. I did not realize that. And they were discussing realigning the proposed signalized access along 926 to line up opposite Bridlewood Boulevard. Fran added that the department strongly favors the alignment opposite Bridlewood Boulevard. Notwithstanding the comment from PennDOT, the plan has not been revised to realign the access at Bridlewood Boulevard. Is that correct?
The conditional use plan does not show the access opposite Bridlewood. That's correct.
Okay. Can I turn your attention to PC3 for a couple of minutes? Do you have that?
So it appears that PC3 is the minutes of the scoping meeting dated April 17, 2017.